Welcome to another late lunch Pharaoh art stream. This time looking at interwar art at the Royal Academy 1930. Well, we've been on quite a journey so far. We've got around about an hour to take you through this next year. Some interesting stuff here. Again, not necessarily one of my favorites, but I think some nice pieces overall. So let's get cracking and take a look at the first piece of art. And we've got our landscape master, Sidney Lee, here with a piece called The Approach of Night. And I've kind of often described how Sidney flitters between pure landscape work and some of these pieces which are almost naturalistic, but it's about the landscape of man, almost kind of like how Constable is interested in kind of harvest time and the country as a dwelling place of man. Sydney here is looking at like a landscape inhabited by man. So obviously we've got this kind of river, and there's a kind of a big old janky bridge. I mean, I love the kind of the wood struts poking out across here, and it's the approach of night, so it's about to be dark, and we can see people heading off back home. A couple of people in their boat here. This woman with some various goods that she's carrying, and even the birds heading back to their nests for the night. And so we have these kind of elements of landscape, like the river, the clouds, etc. But this kind of quite powerful sense of mankind, but it's kind of been almost reduced to like a cliff face or something like that. And again, note how all of his human figures have been dehumanized. You know, that there's no faces, no emotion. They're just kind of elements within the bigger composition. Now, I definitely think this is some kind of reflection on there's a famous Hokusai Bridge print that Van Gogh paints. Now, if you compare the two, they're quite different, but bridge as a subject, I think definitely makes me think it's certainly inspired or got Sidney thinking about that piece. But I love this, one of Sidney's better pieces, and a really interesting interplay between the line between landscape and lived-in space. Okay, we've got a piece from Phil Potts here. It's the incredulity of St. Thomas. So for those who don't know, this is appropriate for the Lenten season. After Jesus' resurrection, he visits various disciples in Galilee. And one of the disciples was Thomas. I think he's with other disciples at the time. And he can't believe that Jesus is back. And so Jesus tells him to touch the wounds that he has. And that's what the incredulity is. It's the unbelief of Thomas and the need to physically see Jesus. Now, I mean, I think you always got to contrast this scene with Mary Noli Mitangere, don't touch me. And again, the idea of ideas of faith, and the faithful are the ones that don't need to physically see or even physically touch. So there's an interesting contrast between those two scenes. St. Thomas is almost monastic in his kind of like a coat, and again, Jesus is there's something there's almost like a priest or something like that. This is quite a stripped back for Phil Potts, definitely less of his kind of symbolic style. I would say that it's okay. It's not my favorite Phil Pot by any means, but still masterfully done. I think scenes like this are difficult because there's just so much ground that's already been made. How do you make your mark without derivating too much? Normally, Philpott's quite an innovator when it comes to these kind of biblical scenes, like we've seen with the Annunciation, for example. So it's a little bit disappointing. I think this is kind of a little bit too straightforward to him, but nicely done nonetheless. Okay, our next piece is Frank Short, The Angry Cloud. Now, we already saw that kind of desert landscape piece, or maybe it was rolling countryside. I think it was last year or the year before. And he's come back with another real masterful etching here. I just feel like these etchings by Frank are just so beautiful. This one's called The Angry Cloud, and you can see the kind of coastline here, a lighthouse in the background which has been lit. So again, maybe the sun setting. So you can start to see that kind of turn from night to day. The waves are still rolling in on the beach, and on the horizon is this dark, ominous hand of a cloud which is stretching over the horizon, blocking out the last bit of the sun and coming directly towards us. That is the named Angry Cloud. I think the piece for me is very well composed and balanced. That the cloud doesn't take up too much space. If you see what Frank's done here, he's left a lot of room in the sky, really, with the cloud taking up maybe a quarter of the piece. But it's that suggestion of what's going to happen gives it its ominous quality, I think, more so than if you were being fully enraptured. And I think the same's true with things like the lighthouse and the kind of use of light. There's also a real fuzziness around the outside. Maybe it's a mezzo tint instead, giving it that kind of watery softness. And I think that really reflects the light that you get at these kind of times right at the end of the day. So really nice piece by Frank. Again, another real masterful one. Some of my favorite landscapes from Frank Short, I think, so far. And this is definitely up there. Okay, we've got another W. Russell Flint. He's the kind of watercolorist that basically focuses only on women. We've seen a lot of his allegorical pieces so far, Spring Caprice, etc. And we've got a nice coloured portrait here, this time silver and gold. So it's really about the kind of sitter, but also it's about this is really a colours piece, and unsurprisingly that Flint, being a watercolor man, is on the Desenio Coloro spectrum, is more on the color side than design. And what do we see? We see a beauty laid out on maybe a day bed or a bed itself, and she's reclining in a awkward position. She's surrounded by luxurious, luscious silks and satins, and she's staring directly at a mirror, at herself, stretched out. So this is in some ways a vanity piece, really. But I think for me, I think firstly the two major interesting things are the composition, where if you think about other kind of women lying down, you immediately think of Venuses, and they're often well spaced in the center of the piece, right dead center, so all of the attention comes to them. But Flint's lifted her up. If you see where she's lying in the top third of the horizontal, he's also stretched her out so she feels like she could take up even more room than the frame could take. And he's placed the mirror really at the center of the piece. So I think it's asking the question: what's the real subject here? Is it the woman, or is it the reflection on vanity? The other impressive thing is, like I mentioned, the colors in here. Beautiful yellows, greens as the two kind of major, but with maybe like little shots of red. You can see the kind of, are they fruits, or maybe it's a red pen that she's been reading some correspondence. And then the the kind of Venetian red vanity mirror, the pink of the kind of the throw that's underneath her. So it's a real difficult color grouping. I think as soon as you're using yellow, it's very, very tricky to do. But he's leaned into that and given it like an oriental feel, and I think it suits it, perfectly. And this is one of my favorite Flint's pieces. Just a shout out to the handwork, which I think is really beautiful here. So yes, the hands are stretched out as part of the body, but also they have interesting poses. There's a foreshortening on the left arm. It's very tricky to do, and again, just shows Flint's skill and mastery of the female form. Okay, this next piece from Walter W. Russell. I think we've had some of his pieces before, so I haven't included the intro here. But this is Cordelia, and this for me is kind of interesting because there's elements of Bloomsbury in there, I feel. So again, if you look at her dress, look at the looseness inside there. That could be straight out of a Vanessa Bell painting, but there's some strong realism as well. So look at the hands, for example, or the face. Very well rendered, but with this softness to it that instantly reminds me of someone like Titian, who doesn't give you a line. He just gives you the feeling, and it's all about tricking the eye into feeling like there's a line there. So an interesting kind of novel piece, which kind of steps between different genres. Cordelia herself is kind of casually leaning out here. Maybe she's got a fan on her knee, and she's looking at the window. Maybe she can hear someone come by, or birds tweeting, or maybe she's waiting for someone. Her face itself is a little bit awkward, but she's kind of there's some surprise in there, even though the body is kind of slumped down to a degree. So it's capturing this moment of interest as opposed to a fixed pose, which again makes it stand out a little bit. Okay, another Cadogan Cooper. I mean, by now I think he's clearly become known for his young girl paintings, basically. These kind of the first flowerings. This one's a little bit cheesy, I think. I prefer some of his more kind of structured, almost like medieval paintings. This is kind of like more freer, more like what other people are doing. So, but it was still definitely marked out as notably good in the year, but again, not one of his best, I think. But this piece was kind of interesting from Lamorna Birch, one of our expert landscape painters. And I felt like this is one of the most impressionistic pieces we've seen so far. This is called Sunday Night in St John's Wood, which is in North London. Been through it many a time, and I think it really captures the kind of mood of suburban London. Like, obviously, it's way more urbanized now, but these places were practically villages back in the 30s, before the Second World War. And so you've got all of these kind of trees around, but it's the kind of various bits of business here which make it interesting. There's the town that's been lit up in the back by the moon. The moon's definitely out tonight. We've got this little cat roaming around, and most of interest of all, these two mysterious figures. I mean, I immediately read the one on the right as a police officer with his hat, but equally they could be lovers walking home, or miscreants up to no good. And it's no surprise that Lamorna has chosen to place them right at the center of the piece. There's also this little gate here, so you almost kind of feel like you're looking out of the house at the same time at this scene. So it's part kind of like Renaissance landscape, part incidental realism here, but then combined with the treatment, which again is very impressionistic. Look at the kind of the brush strokes. Nothing has true form. Lots of individual small. There's a bit of almost like Serratian pointillism going on, although nothing as pedantic as that. But really nice piece, and a little bit of interest there, which makes it gives it a bit of a narrative. Now, we haven't had an open painting for a little while, so we've got John Hamsworth here. And again, so I'm going to keep saying it. This wasn't one of my favourite open paintings either. So we've got John, three-quarter view, laid down on this velvet chair. Again, Orpen's the master of the kind of seated sitter, the casual setting. And then he's thrown in a few little bits of fabric in to make the piece a little bit more interesting. But there is kind of a cocksuredness and a confidence to the sitter, but I think it's maybe a little bit too much. And I don't like the handling of the fabric. Like, he's really messed up the silk across here. It just feels very unnatural, especially compared to the kind of beautiful satin light lines across here. So again, kind of interesting, but not one of my favorite Orpen paintings. Now we've got this Miss Joy Leon from L. Campbell Taylor. Now, Campbell Taylor did the Primavera last time, I think, and he likes to do these kind of seated women, young beauties who are kind of pensively looking off into the distance. And here we see Miss Joy just doing that. It's a casual setting. She's sitting down. Her beautiful furs and ermines have been dropped down, so maybe she's come back home from a night at the opera or the theatre, and there is confidence in her, but also she's deep in thought. And again, look at the hands here. So she's maybe she's met someone, or I think we're presented with a character who's in a little bit of conflict, and we're being asked the question about that, what's happened. But I like the rendering on this, and the little narrative story, and these little bits of incidental background pieces, which make it a little bit more interesting than just a normal portrait. Speaking of Primavera, we've got Harold Knight doing his version of Spring, and again, this is more kind of like Knight. So this is more like Harold's painting as Laura. So again, if you've been tuning in, Laura does a lot of these female figures. A real focus on the female and a real focus on individual sitters, while Harold does more Vermeer-esque kind of peering into people's houses. But I think this is kind of showing that Harold can do this kind of work. I sort of prefer his other stuff, if I'm honest with you. I think Laura does a better job of some of the women. The hands are very mannish here. The figure is like not particularly flattering. I mean, there's some complicated lighting here, a couple of different light sources, and I think he's highlighted that really nicely. But I'd say it's a decent, obviously a very good painting. But I think his wife does this better than he does, sadly. Now, we haven't heard of G. Spencer Watson for a little while. He has been doing stuff in the background, but we haven't had any of his big kind of mythic paintings for a while. I think he's basically, what's interesting, a lot of the old boys by the 30s are a bit long in the tooth. I mentioned Dixie dying, for example. People start to die from the 30s who were popular in the Edwardian period. And Spencer, I think he doesn't last much longer than this. This is Kathleen Stenning, who I describe her as like one of the extreme modernists, but who focused on graphic design. So she's famous for some of the kind of she's part of the wave of TFL modernist posters that Frank, I can't remember his name, Flint, basically the head of TFL at the time came in and said, we're going to modernize all of our posters, and I'm going to use these cutting edge extreme moderns because I think they're better for design posters. So that's why you have these kind of iconic poster designs. She's one of those artists. Now I think Spencer normally has, if you see some of his other portraits, tend to be a little bit more fussy, putting people in these kind of more luxurious backgrounds. There is a distinct casualness to the situation. And interestingly, maybe a little bit of a hat tip to Kathleen's design and modernist background with this kind of strong checkerboard pattern in the background here. She's also an exceptionally confident sitter. You can see she's three quarters, body facing one way, head looking the other, but look at that absolute scowl of a face there. You don't want to be on the wrong side of her. Cigarette in hand. I think it's the first cigarette we've seen on anyone, and I absolutely love that she wants to, because again, I'm pretty sure that the women smoking thing is still relatively controversial by this point. It used to be that men would do the smoking together when they separate at the end of an evening. While she's a bohemian artist, and you can see that with all of her necklaces and velveteen coats. The colors are really interesting too. There's this lovely almost purple blue and coral red, but balanced with a browny yellow. So it's a real tricky triad of colors. But Spencer does a really great job, I think, capturing her character and the strength of confidence that you must need to have had to be a woman artist at the time. Okay, we've got another Philpott here, and this is the creation of man. I think this is far superior piece to the St. Thomas piece. And I think what fascinates me with Philpott is his just ability to create really original themes of well-done topics that feel totally natural and almost perfect. And this is obviously the scene of God creating man. Now, people have seen other versions of this where he's kind of down in like a mud pit or something like that. But Philpott's decided to take him to the highest heights here. You can see he's surrounded by this mountainscape. And Adam here is in this quite awkward pose, really. He's sort of kneeling down, kind of like he's raising himself up, but also he could have been collapsed. And you get this, it's a very awkward pose, one which is quite delicate, but also shows this awakening. And it's almost kind of like he has been birthed out of the red fire above. There's something about the cut in the fabric of reality itself that the Lord's hands come out of, and this flaming fire which occupies the space. So it almost looks like he could have been dropped out of that into reality. His head is turned away, still not fully conscious yet. And so I think it's just a really fascinating piece. The father's hands as these kind of hands of fire is just masterful. The pose is brilliant. There's something Chilean almost about it. It's a very awkward body, gawky, lanky. It's not necessarily heroic, but it still is kind of quite muscular at the same time. And also, I think he does it without his classic like homosexual erotic undertones to it as well. I think this is a very tasteful piece that is, I think, very very tame for some of those kind of erotic elements to it as well, which I think is perfectly in keeping with the piece and very respectful of the subject matter as well. And I think you get that idea that Philpott was a very devoted man. Now, just something on the colours here as well. It's reds, greeny blues are the three major colours, and you can see the rocks kind of mirroring the red of the fire. They're all being illuminated, but the beautiful landscape in the background is very powerful and very potent as well. Okay, we've got D.W. Hawksley, so she's the kind of illustrator, watercolorist here, maybe almost a bit of an Orientalist. There's something definitely very kind of Oriental about this piece. It's Leda and the Swan. This is where Zeus turns into a swan so he can get to Leda. Now, this is normally shown with like Leda sort of copulating with the swan, which I always found quite gross, really. I don't really like it. I think it's very unromantic and rather like savagely brutal, really.